of Human Government. And last week we talked about the dispensation of human conscience, where God kind of left mankind up to their own conscience. He let conscience be their guide. And what we learned about mankind is that there's no limits to our depravity and our sin and the things we'll do when we're left to our own conscience. Now, I made the joke that if you walk up to a lake and there's a sign that says don't pee in the lake, you can rest assured someone has peed in that lake. We're apt to do all kinds of terrible things, but that made me started my brain ticking. And I thought, I wonder what some of the dumbest things, dumb rules and laws that we have in the world are. Some of these are kind of funny. Some of them make zero sense at all. Stu, where's Stu? In Washington, it's illegal to kill Bigfoot. If you want to kill Bigfoot in Washington, you got to somehow entice him over the border. In Georgia, it's illegal to eat fried chicken with a fork. I don't know about spicy chicken tenders. In Idaho, cannibalism is illegal, which tells me someone... something's going on, right? In Kansas, you can't have ice cream on your cherry pie.
It's un-American.
In Kentucky, you cannot have reptiles in your religious services. So, man, keep the snakes put away. In Louisiana, you cannot wrestle bears. Someone in Louisiana has been wrestling bears, and they lost. So we needed a law, right? Don't do it. This brings us to human government. Now remember, each dispensation is marked by failure. How did we fail in the dispensation? How did mankind fail in the dispensation of conscience? You remember what Cain did what did Cain do? He murdered his brother, right? So when left to his own devices, what we learned is there's no limit to what mankind will do. Cain murdered Abel. So that ushers in a new dispensation. This is the dispensation of human government. And in this dispensation, we'll see really the way God relates with mankind changes because of that one single act. It runs from the time of Noah's flood, the time he left the ark really, to the time that Abraham was called. So we're looking at Genesis 8 to Genesis 11. It's a period of about 226 years. And we see some changes in the environment and in the earth from the prior dispensation to this one. Starting in Genesis chapter 8, verse 22. Now remember, this was the first flood, really, that we had any kind of record of, and it was a global flood we learned last time. Well, starting in Genesis 8:22, we see that basically the earth is functioning the way it functions now, and it's functioning the way it's supposed to. 8:22 says, while the earth remains, seed time, harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. So things are functioning basically the way they're supposed to. The earth works. God has set it up to work the way he intended. The sun will come out tomorrow. Now, there's a lot of activism with global warming, and don't hear me say that it's okay to pollute the earth. That's not what I'm saying. We should take care of the earth, right? We should take care of our water, take care of our air, absolutely. But when someone tells me that the ice caps are melting and the whole planet's going to flood again, no, it's not. God has promised in Genesis that he will never again flood the earth. We read last week the promise of the rainbow, right? In Genesis 9, that rainbow is a promise that he will never again flood the earth. 9:16 says, when the bow is in the cloud, I will look upon it to remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth. He's promised he won't do that. Genesis 8, verse 22, the earth is functioning properly. Just one verse prior to that, the Lord smelled this offering, and he says, I will never again curse the ground on the account of man, for the intent of man's heart. We'll read the rest of this verse here later, but he says, I'm not going to do it again. It won't happen again. I can rest pretty easy knowing the sun's going to come up tomorrow. God's got it under control. Things work the way things are supposed to work. God has told me that in chapter 8 of Genesis. Things work. We see some other changes from dispensation to dispensation. We see now in Genesis 9, verse 2, it says, the fear of you and the terror of you will be on every beast of the earth, every bird of the sky, and everything that creeps on the ground, and all the fish of the sea, into your hand they are given. So we see animals now have a natural fear of man. There's animosity. There's a change in the relationship between the way mankind and animals interact. We also see in the next verse, 9:3, every moving thing that is alive shall be food for you. I give all to you as I gave the green plant. So now in addition to plants, now we eat anything. That's a change from dispensation to dispensation. So the way we experience life changes as this dispensation changes. The biggest difference, and we can track this throughout the book of Genesis, is in the lifespan of mankind. So if you look at Noah, he lived to be, look at 9:29. Noah lives to be, it says, 950 years old. And as you read through Genesis, as you get further removed from Noah, further removed from the flood, the lifespans drop dramatically. Shem, look at chapter 11, verses 10 and 11. Shem was 100 years old when he became the father of Arpachshad 2 years after the flood, and then he lived 500 years after that. So he lived 600. So we see a decrease. Just 5 generations from Noah, we see someone named Peleg who only lived to be 239 years. If you look at Genesis chapter 11, 10 years removed from Noah, 10 generations removed from Noah, Abraham lived 175 years. So 775 years less as we progress from Noah through Abraham, the lifespan changes. What's the average lifespan of mankind now?
70.
Pretty close. It's right in there, yeah, 72 point something. And it's actually, for the first time in a long time, dropped 2 years in a row. So both years after COVID, the lifespan has dropped just a tad. It was, I think in 2019, it was up around 74 years. Now it's down to 72 and some change. So it's dropping just a little bit. 100 years ago, it was even less. So we see kind of the lifespan dropping. Then we see modern medicine fighting back, and we get it up a little bit over 70, and now we just can't hold on there. Why do you think that is? Why do you think Noah lived to be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years more than what you will?
He didn't have buffalo chicken.
He didn't have buffalo chicken. I was afraid to ask how much buffalo chicken you have to eat to wind up in the doctor's office. Just enough, right?
There's something in the Bible that says something about 70 years is a good life.
Yeah.
And also I think the more people there were, the less you needed a long life to progress and multiply.
Okay. So maybe it's just in the way. What did you say?
Sin, it's affected our genes.
Sin. Yeah. The further you get removed from perfection, right, from the Garden of Eden, the lifespan drops dramatically. And I think that speaks to the pervasiveness of sin, right? That's how far sin has progressed. It's so bad it's affecting our lifespan. We've already seen men apparently will wrestle bears. That probably impacts our lifespan. So the lifespan throughout Genesis drops dramatically. That is a change as we progress through these dispensations. But we also see some changes in the revelation, in the governmental relationship that God has with man. Look at Genesis 8, 20, 21. I told you, some things carry on from dispensation to dispensation. Here's one that carries on from the last. Chapter 8, verse 20 and 21, it says, Then Noah built an altar to the Lord and took of every clean animal and of every clean bird and offered the burnt offerings on the altar. The Lord smelled the soothing aroma. And he said to himself, I will never again curse the ground. So again, we saw this in the last dispensation. To approach God requires a sacrifice, a blood sacrifice. We see Noah doing the same thing. We'll see this as we progress through the dispensations. We saw Cain and Abel doing the same exact thing, right? They had to offer up a sacrifice to approach God. We see Noah doing the same thing. In verse 21, to go on and finish reading that, we see God kind of restate the heart condition of man. He says, the intent of man's heart is evil from his youth. It's in our nature. Adam and Eve sinned, and we looked at this in the last dispensation because in Genesis chapter, I believe it's chapter 6:5, he says, the Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth. Now he says that the intent of man's heart is evil from his youth. It's just born in us. It's inherited from Adam and Eve. Tony says it all the time. If you walk back in fact, I kind of witnessed it last Sunday. If you walk in the nursery, there's a kid taking a toy from another kid. I saw it with my own 4 eyes. It happened. There may have been some kind of violence. The kids take this stuff serious. But this sinful nature, we're just born with it. So when we talk about when left to their own conscience, mankind will do all kinds of stupid things, we come by that naturally. It's inherited. Now, I'm not saying you're not capable of doing good things, because you are. I watch you guys do good things all the time. But it simply means that we have this sinful nature that requires saving. Left to our own accord, we cannot save ourselves because of this sinful nature. God restates it here. Our hearts are evil. We saw that the animals now fear us. But here's the big change we're about to see that brings about this requirement for human government. Turn to Genesis 9, verse 5. Surely I will require your lifeblood. From every beast I will require it. And from every man's brother I will require the life of man. Whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed, for in the image of God he made man. So we see that God now builds into the way he relates with us an accountability to other men. If you shed a man's blood, you will be held accountable by man. It's capital punishment, right? That's the basis for human government. Why do you think God builds this into his relationship with us? If you shed the life of another human being, you're going to be held accountable, and your blood will be shed by man. Why does he build this into the relationship? Sorry?
For us to hold each other accountable.
Yeah, we're holding each other accountable. He says right here, because in the image of God, he made us. And because God made us in his image, when we take a life is required. That's God's law. And this is one of the things we debate a lot when it comes to political elections, when it comes to political parties and candidates. And I don't know where you stand on it, and I'm not trying to change your mind on it. I'm just telling you, God created it. He created capital punishment. He even goes so far as saying if an animal sheds the life of a man, that animal's blood will be taken. And I see this on Facebook all the time. I don't know what it says about me, but I like bears a lot. And I follow a lot of bear things on Facebook. And every so often I'll see where this bear has gone rogue and killed somebody. And then the hunters have to go out and kill the bear, right? Because once a bear kills somebody, they say you just never know. It may kill someone else. And there's always someone that says, why punish the bear for being a bear? It's just being a bear. Bears kill people. Why punish the bear? Because God created man in his image. And if a bear's going to kill a man, we can't let that happen again. Go kill it. It's God's law, right? He put it in the book. Whoever sheds man's blood, his blood shall be shed. So capital punishment is built into this, and Paul kind of adds on to how we should view government. Turn to Romans 13. And I promise you, I'm not trying to change your political affiliation at all. But turn to Romans 13. Verses 1 through 4. It says, every person is to be in subjection to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those which exist are established by God. Therefore, whoever resists authority has opposed the ordinance of God, and they who have opposed will receive condemnation upon themselves. For rulers are not a cause of fear for good behavior, but for evil. Do you want to have no fear of authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. For it is a minister of God to you for good. But if you do what is evil, be afraid, for it does not bear the sword for nothing. For it is a minister of God, an avenger, who brings wrath on the one who practices evil. So the basic function of government is to encourage people to do what is good. That's the basic function. That's why government exists. That's why God created it. That's why we see it here. It's good not to kill one another. It's good not to commit murder. So God creates human government to discourage it. Where we get in trouble is when government tries to do more than that. God created government to encourage good behavior. Now, when government tries to dictate every aspect of my life that has nothing to do with good behavior but other things, that's overreaching, right? I'm not trying to change your political beliefs. I'm just saying we get in trouble when government tries to do more than what God intended it for. God intended it to encourage good behavior and to discourage evil. That's why we have police. That's why we have military. That's why we have prisons. Because God is trying to discourage evil, so he created human government. And when human government operates outside of that scope, we run into some issues, okay? This is fundamental to this dispensation, is this idea of capital punishment. This idea that the spilling of blood requires a life. That's all new. It doesn't happen up until this point in Genesis. So, I told you in the last dispensation, God added no laws. He left everybody up to their own conscience. In this dispensation, he creates one law. Don't kill. And if you do, you're going to be held accountable by your fellow human beings. That's the law. How do you think man did?
Terrible. As always.
Our track record's not so good, right? Now, this is in direct response to Cain and Abel, right? Cain couldn't figure out how to live under his own conscience, so now we have human government. And Cain wasn't the first one. Remember, we saw when Cain created murder, or committed murder, we saw all of mankind deteriorate. God said that everyone was so evil that he had to destroy the world in a flood. Let's see how we respond to this. All right? Our track record's not very good, but I want to look at a couple of verses that honestly have, for me, this is one of the more confusing passages in all of Scripture. It confuses the heck out of me. All right? So I looked at this a lot this week, trying to wrap my brain around it. Go to Genesis chapter 9. I'm interested to see how you guys view this. Genesis 9, starting at verse 20. Then Noah began farming and planted a vineyard. He drank of the wine and became drunk, and then covered himself inside his tent. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brothers outside. But Shem and Japheth took a garment and laid it upon both their shoulders and walked backward and covered the nakedness of their father, and their faces were turned away so that they did not see their father's nakedness. Now, I'll read the rest of this here in a second. We're going to see that Noah is going to curse the line of Canaan, the line of Ham, because of Ham's actions. Here's what's always confused me. What did Ham do wrong?
Gossiped. It's the only thing I can see.
Dad's in there naked.
Drunk and naked.
Drunk and naked. Is that gossip? I mean, he's telling the truth. Noah's drunk and naked.
Dishonored his father, didn't it?
Dishonored his father. Okay, I can kind of bind it out. Let's go back here, and then I'll come back to you.
In my Bible, it says here that he had a sinful thought, and he was glad to see his father's dignity and weakness. And that's why he went out and told his brothers, "Come look."
I can kind of see that. I don't read it in the text. I mean, I don't read that he was happy about it. But maybe. I'll come back to you, Trent. Let's go to Linda, then Trent.
I think that a proper reaction would have been to do the same thing that the other boys did, to cover him without looking at him.
Now, see, that's smart. What Linda just said is the proper reaction. We know the other two did something right. Now, what they did was they covered up their father, right? That's a great answer. That's smart. We'll come back to that. Trent?
Did he not uncover his mother's nakedness as well?
I'm sorry?
Did he not uncover his mother's nakedness as well?
In this passage,
Yes.
I see nothing about their mother unless I'm missing it.
But if you uncover the father's nakedness, you uncover the mother with their one.
Yeah, I don't read that. I mean, and that's kind of part of my issue with this is a lot of times I see what people say that he did wrong isn't really spelled out in the text. It's hard for me to see where they arrive. You're on to something, Linda.
That passage is always confusing
didn't just see his father naked, he stared at his father for an extended period.
I thought of that. I mean, and there's even this idea, if you go back and you really break down the original language, there's this idea that maybe there was some inappropriate sexual thought or sexual behavior. Maybe, but that's kind of a reach. But yeah, I've considered that too. Let's go back to what Linda said. We know the other two did something right. These two, Shem, it says, but Shem and Japheth. So we're supposed to know what they're doing is right. What Ham did was wrong. They took a garment and laid it upon their shoulders, walked in backward, which tells me looking at him, there's something sinful about that. They walk in backward. They covered the nakedness of their father. Here's what occurred to me this week, because I've really struggled with this. I almost just didn't even talk about it. When Adam and Eve sinned, they realized they were what? Naked. What did God do? He covered them up. They were naked and ashamed, and God covered them up. Well, that's connected to this. It's all part of the same story. So when Shem and Japheth walk in, they see their father naked. He's in his sin. He's drunk, right? Like Adam and Eve, he's naked and sinful. Just like Adam and Eve, they cover him up. They do exactly what God did. Their behavior is godly. They saw their father in need, and they helped him. They took care of him. They provided for his needs. Exactly what God did for Adam and Eve.
Yeah, but they wouldn't have known he's naked unless Ham had gone in and seen.
You're right. They wouldn't have known if Ham hadn't
Run his mouth.
run his mouth. But Ham didn't take care of his father's need. Maybe he looked too long, Lisa. Maybe there was some kind of sinful thought. Maybe he gossiped. Maybe. But what I know he didn't do was take care of his father in his father's time of need. He just left.
Because he should have covered him instead of waiting for the brothers to cover him.
Absolutely. He should have covered him, right?
He could have still told them, but he should have covered him.
Yeah. He should have taken the time to cover him, just like his brothers. The lesson here is not, yes, Ham sinned, and we're going to see he sinned pretty bad based on Noah's response. But I've always overlooked what his brothers did. I've always focused more on what Ham did and not what his brothers did. His brothers did exactly what God did. The old bracelets, I used to wear one for a long time. What would Jesus do? There's a lot of truth to that, right? If you can figure out what would Jesus do in this situation and you do it, you're on the right track. That's what we talk about when we talk about the church being the hands and feet of Christ. We're doing what Jesus would do. Jesus would clothe the naked. Jesus would feed the hungry. He would house the people that don't have a place to live. He would attend to their very needs. When we fail to do that, we're a Ham. When we do it, we're a Shem and Japheth. There's a difference, right? If I see someone in need, I should take care of it. Why? Because I've already learned God takes this stuff serious. He created mankind in his image. We can't kill them. We can't murder them. And we should take care of them when they're in need. God takes this serious. And look at what happens here. There's fallout from what Ham fails to do. Noah, and we can't let Noah off the hook. Was it good for him to be drunk? No. Even righteous people, when left to their own devices, do stupid things. Noah would have peed in the lake. All right? He gets drunk. He gets naked. He wakes up, sees what happened. Who tells Noah? I think his brothers gossiped.
He knew what his younger son had done to him.
Somehow Noah finds out, right? He says, "Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants he shall be to his brothers." He also said, "Blessed be the Lord the God of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant. May God enlarge Japheth, and let him dwell in the tents of Shem, and let Canaan be his servant. So he curses the line of Canaan. That's going to play a part in the story as we move through the scripture. And he blesses the line of his brothers Shem and Japheth. Noah, and then it goes on to tell us how old Noah was. So mankind, the most righteous example of man, sins. Right out of the gate, he sins, right? It only gets worse from there. Go to verse 20. Nope, I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong place. Go to chapter 11, verse 1. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago on a Tuesday in men's group. This takes place in modern day Iraq. And it starts in chapter 11, verse 1. Now the whole earth used the same language and the same words. It came about as they journeyed east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. They said to one another, "Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly." And they used brick for stone, and they used tar for mortar. They said, "Come, let us build for ourselves a city and a tower whose top will reach into heaven, and let us make for ourselves a name. Otherwise we will be scattered abroad over the face of the earth." We're going to see that God does not respond well to this. What are they doing wrong?
They were told to scatter. They were told to scatter.
They were,
Doing it on their own and not asking for God's guidance.
they're doing it on their own. They're actually absolutely being disobedient. We'll see that here in a second. God had told Adam and Eve, if you remember, be fruitful and multiply, right? We've talked about this, that what that means is expand the kingdom. Expand it. Bring as many people in. Expand God's territory. Well, God tells Noah the same exact thing in chapter 9, verse 7. He says, "As for you, be fruitful and multiply. Populate the earth abundantly and multiply in it." Expand the kingdom. That doesn't change from dispensation to dispensation. We are still supposed to expand God's kingdom. And then human government, whose only reason for existence is to encourage good behavior, they get together and they say, let's do the exact opposite of what God wants us to do. Instead of expanding the kingdom, let's build a tower so we can get to heaven apart from God. We won't even need him. We'll build the biggest building we can, and we'll all congregate here. We'll do the exact opposite. So I put this in here. It says, let's do something big. Let's make a name for ourselves, and let's stay together and not scatter to fill the earth. That's what human government came up with. That's what the leaders of mankind came up with. All they were supposed to do was encourage good behavior, and they went outside of the bounds. They came up with their own rules, and they start building a tower. The exact opposite of what God had told them to do. That's like, this hurts me probably more than it hurts you, because I always tell people I'm an introvert. I'm socially stupid, is what I tell people. But God commands us to tell people about Jesus, right? If I would have handed someone a little Jesus that I don't know, it's not the Jesus part that bugs me, it's the talking to him. I don't know you. That's hard for me. I'm an introvert. That's just the way I'm wired. I'm telling you, he's way better at it than I am. That wigs me out, the thought of talking to somebody. So this hurts me more than it does you. God tells me to do it. God tells me to go out and tell people about Jesus. It's in the Great Commission, Matthew chapter 28. Go out and tell people about Jesus. Tell them what he commands you to do. Baptize them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. That goes against my brain. But God commands me to do it. He commanded us to expand the kingdom. We all decide to build a tower and do the exact opposite. Let's see how God responds, because this is the marker of this whole dispensation, starting in verse 5 of chapter 11. The Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. The Lord said, behold, they are one people, and they will have the same language. And that is what they began to do. And now nothing which they purpose to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down there and confuse their language, so that they will not understand one another's speech. Who's the us?
Trinity.
Yeah, us. Father, Son, and the Spirit, right? Let us go down and confuse them. Let's change their languages and confuse them. Let's force them to scatter. So the Lord scattered them abroad from over the face of the whole earth, and they stopped building the city. Therefore its name was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of the whole earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the whole face of the earth. The Tower of Babel, right, is what's representative of man's sinful nature, man's rebellion, man's sin, man's inclination to do the exact opposite of what God would have us do. That's the exact location in what is now Iraq, where the city of Babylon would be built. The city of Babylon is also associated with the wicked world. You read about Babylon in Revelation. Everything that is opposite to God's plan for redemption is associated with Babylon, and this is where it all starts. And in response, God changes the language and forces mankind to scatter. That's this dispensation of modern government. That's why we had one government when God created it. Now we have hundreds of governments across the planet. We have hundreds of different races. We have hundreds, if not thousands, of different languages. It all started at the Tower of Babel because of mankind's disobedience. And what we see when we read through these dispensations, when we read God's plan of redemption, is an exact reversal of all of that back into the way God intended it to be. We'll talk more about that later. So, God scatters mankind. Let me ask you this. What do you learn from this dispensation? We've only got 4 minutes left. What do you learn about God from this dispensation? Gary?
He means what he says.
When God says, be fruitful and multiply, he means it.
Yes.
When God says, I created mankind in our image, respect them, he means it, right? What else?
He's not going to let you do what you want to do. His will is going to be done.
His will is what is important. And we've talked about this a couple times. His glory. What else? Sorry? There's consequences. When you step outside of his will, probably consequences for bad spelling too. There's consequences. What about the sanctity of life? God values life. And that's why in today's debates, this isn't really a lesson on abortion, but it could be very easily, right? When you start talking about how much God values life, you have to consider his will when you talk about abortion. And here's something I see all the time. And here's how you respond to it. People say, well, how can you be for the death penalty and against abortion? You hypocrites. Because God is against abortion and for the death penalty. I can be the same. I'm going to match God. God created that baby, right? Sanctity of human life. And he created that person that you killed. And he created the death penalty to hold you accountable. So there's no inconsistency in that. There's no hypocrisy in that. You can hold those two values, and when someone on Facebook tells you you're a hypocrite, you can look them dead in the eye and say, no, I'm not. I'm not a hypocrite. God has the same opinion. What do you learn about man from this dispensation?
Always going to be sinful.
Evil nature rebels at rules. The more rules we get, the more we want to.
More rules we get, the more rules we break. What was you going to say, Ken?
It just shows the sinful nature of man.
Yeah, absolutely. When left to our own devices, we will do all kinds of sinful things. We will pee in the lake every time. Anything else? Ralph?
Just like you said earlier, we're not under God's government any longer. We create our own government. And we're paying for it now.
We are absolutely paying for, believe it or not, that says government. We are paying for it because we've allowed government to turn into something it's not supposed to be, right? It's absolutely gone against what God intended it to do. Now it overreaches and it tries to reach into every aspect of our lives. Wear a mask. Don't go to church. Seriously? That's not what government was created for. It was created to encourage good behavior and to discourage bad behavior, and now it tries to do a whole lot more. Again, I'm not trying to change your political persuasion, but if I do, all right. Any other things that we can take away from this message?
They built the tower to get to heaven on their own.
Absolutely.
Everybody's always looking for a way.
Yeah, they built the tower to get to heaven on their own, and honestly, you're absolutely right. We've been doing it ever since. Just watch a couple episodes of Oprah. We don't need God to get to heaven.
And also this new anti-Semitism bill, it would more or less not allow you to read the New Testament
Yeah,
because Jews believe that the Messiah hasn't came yet.
yeah.
That you're talking about the Messiah.
Government overreaching. And when left to its own devices, government will do that every time. All right, I'm going to stop there because it's time to stop. Any snide remarks? Dan?
No.
Okay. I gave you the opportunity. Uh-oh.
You asked about shortening lives. Well, if you're not going to believe in the sanctity of life, then I'm going to shorten it.
That sounded like a threat.
Well, that's what God did. People went from these 9
Oh, okay.
lives
So you were
to
talking from
7
God's
year lives,
perspective.
from
I
God's
thought you were
perspective.
threatening me personally. I was about to run.
From God's perspective,
God,
you're
if you
not
don't
gonna-
respect the sanctity of human life, I'm going to shorten your lifespan.
because
Okay.
then you've got less time to screw up.
I get where you're coming from. I like that. Gary, would you close us out in prayer, sir?